The game of Hero Quest is played on a board, and this board is separated into chambers and passages, and though not all chambers or passages are going to be used in every adventure, the game uses this board to create all sorts of dungeons. Before the game can begin, however, the players playing the heroes are gonna need a character sheet. But before we talk about those players, we need to talk about the one player who's playing all of the enemies, Lord Zargon, the Powerful. Now, Lord Zargon is a very important player. They are the one that has the quest book, which tells you what the adventure is going to be like. In addition to this quest book, he also has a few decks of cards that help him run the quests. He has monster cards, he's got treasure cards, he's got dark spell cards for the really powerful enemies, and then he's got artifact cards that some quests include, and the heroes really want to find those. Another thing that Zargon has is his DM screen, and it's got a bunch of rules and reminders of how the game works, as well as a graph that shows the certain abilities of certain monsters. They kind of match the monster cards that he gets, so it's a quick reference so he doesn't have to look it up by the card. He knows exactly what he's running when he needs to run it. Taking a quick look at the quest book, you've got some lore, first off, and then we've got the quests. And the quests include the map that you're going to be making, as well as the objectives and the special rules of the dungeon. Alright, so that's pretty much all of Zargon's setup. Let's get back to the player setup. This is a character sheet, and it keeps track of how healthy your character is, what their abilities are, and what's in their inventory. Now, before you do anything on this character sheet, I would suggest that you use a pencil and not a pen when you're filling this thing out. Things can change pretty drastically in this game, and you want to be able to change things on your character sheet and not keep replacing it. Alright, so now that's out of the way, let's get on to what you're actually going to be putting on this paper. We have 4 characters when it comes to Hero Quest. We've got the elf, we've got the barbarian, we've got the dwarf, and we've got the wizard. Now, one thing I should mention is each of these classes comes with a male and female version, so you can play either or. There's no stat difference between the sexes, so choose whichever you want. It's going to be the same as long as you're playing that class. I will also say that there are additional classes that you can get through expansions and whatnot, so just be aware that there are options there as well. Okay, so for this example, I'm gonna just go with the elf, and the reason I go with that is because it has combat abilities that are pretty good, and it also has magic. So what we're gonna do is we're going to fill out the information with what's on the card. So first off, it's a character, elf, and then we're going to fill in the attack die, the defend die, the body points, and the mind points. These are stats that will help out in combat, which we'll talk about later. Speaking of combat, the elf card also shows us what kind of weapon they carry, and that would be a short sword. So we can take a look at the short sword card that I have, but it's really not necessary because the character card already tells us that we have an attack die of 2, which is the short sword. If we find a better weapon, however, we'll probably want to write that under weapons as well and change the attack die accordingly. You'll also notice on this character sheet that there's a space for armor, but on the character card, it says that there's no starting armor, so we don't fill that out. Another thing to notice on the character card is movement, and that is 2 red die, meaning that on your turn, you roll 2 red die, and whatever it comes up as, that's how much you can move that turn. Now, as I said before, an elf also can use magic, and there are 4 basic magic schools for heroes, and it's earth, water, air, and fire. Now, elves only can choose one of these schools, so we're going to go with the earth spells, and that has pass through rock, rock skin, and heal body. Very good spells, and the elf does really well with them. Don't worry about not having access to the other 3 stacks of spells, because the other 3 go to the wizard. Alright, so you filled out your character sheet, your elf has his 3 spells, And last but not least, don't forget to get your figurine, your miniature that will be your playing piece for the game. This is your character on the map. To figure out where to put your characters, Zargon will look at the quest and look for the stairs icon. The stairs icon has a matching token that the Zargon will place on the map where it goes, and this is where all of the players place their miniatures. Zargon should also take this time to place down any doors or furniture that are indicated on the map in the starting room. So there you are. After you have distributed some combat dice amongst the players, you're ready to go. So, who goes first? So when it comes to a player's turn, they have a lot of options, so many in fact, that they decided it might be easier if they made a card that listed everything that a player can do. So the first thing that you need to know is you can either move and then perform an action, or perform an action and move. Now we've already covered how movement works before. You roll the dice that your character card says you can roll, and then you move that many spaces. You can't move diagonally though, so it has to be either left, right, up, or down. Now moving on to actions, you have a few options. You can attack opponents, which we'll cover later, and then you can also cast spells, which we will also cover later, but really it's just playing a card and doing what the card says. Next up is searching for treasure, which is simply letting the player draw from the treasure deck unless the room description says that there's a special treasure in here already. Another thing that players can search for are secret doors, and these can be searched for in passages, in rooms, or even in the bottom of pit traps. Now something that you'll want to search for first is traps, and when a trap is present on the map, Zargon indicates the location. Once he's done that, players have to decide whether or not they're just going to go around this trap or use an action to disarm it, which is something that we'll be covering soon as well. Alright, so that's the list of actions you can take. Let's get into the basics of how you play. On every quest, you're going to want to explore the dungeon, and one way you do that is by moving to doors and telling Zargon, "Open the door, Zargon," and he will take the closed door token off of the map and replace it with an open door. And this allows you to do a couple things. First off, you can move through the door now, and you can also see through the door now. Zargon takes a look at his quest map and notices that a door and a wall will be revealed by this character. And so he reaches into his box and pulls out a stone wall token and places it on the map, as well as a door token. Now, opening a door is not technically an action, and since the elf still has movement left, he continues his turn by moving down the corridor. He doesn't turn around any corners or open any more doors, so nothing else is revealed on his turn. The other players take their turns, and the wizard decides to go the opposite direction down the corridor to look around this corner. Zargon reveals that there is a wall blocking the far end of the corridor, but also there's another doorway to explore. The dwarf decides to take her turn and move behind both of these exploring characters, checks for traps, and there are none in this passageway. The barbarian rolls pretty high for his movement, so he moves into the hallway and opens the closed door. What lies behind it is terrifying. There is a desk, a cupboard, an unopened door, and, most frightening of all, 2 orc foes ready to do combat. The barbarian uses the rest of his movement to get in there, but he runs out, and it is Zargon's turn. Now, Zargon's creatures act very much like characters, except they don't move by rolling dice. They have an assigned number of movement spaces. And with the barbarian so close, they don't even have to use all of them. Having closed the space in between them, the orc grabs their attack dice and prepares for combat. Now, this is the part that you've all been waiting for, and it's pretty simple. First off, though, we have to look at the dice. The dice have 3 symbols: a skull, a white shield, and a black shield. The orc rolls all 3 attack dice and gets 1 skull, which means 1 hit. The barbarian gets to defend, however, and gets 2 dice to do it, so he rolls the 2 dice and happens to roll a white shield, which is a save for heroes. So he takes no damage this time. But there are two orcs, and the second one rolls pretty much the same thing. The barbarian goes to defend, but this time rolls 2 skulls, which means he does not block any of the attacks, and since 1 hit was rolled, he loses 1 body point. The barbarian might be in trouble, except for the fact that it's now the player's turn. The elf goes first, however, and he swings his short sword for 2 combat dice and gets 2 skulls. The orc gets to defend with 2 dice, and so has a chance to survive. Upon rolling, however, he gets a black shield and a skull, meaning that he blocks 1, but he still gets hit by 1. And according to the monster card, he only has 1 body point, so that orc is taken out. Not to be excluded from the combat, the wizard runs up and gets to the doorway, but doesn't have enough movement to get inside the room. That's okay, he can still see the orc, and so he casts Fire of Wrath. According to this card, the monster has to roll a 5 or a 6 to avoid taking 1 body point of damage. So the orc takes up the red die and rolls and gets a 2. Not enough, he is eliminated from the map, and the room has been cleared. Seeing that the room no longer holds any threats, the dwarf is ready to move in and check for some treasure. Now, sometimes the quest book has treasures already assigned to this room, and if so, then the heroes automatically get it. If not, the hero has to draw from the treasure deck. And there's a lot of great stuff in the treasure deck. There's gold, there's gems, there's even some magic items that you might find. Also, while you're looking around, you might stumble across a trap, or a wandering monster might just decide to come in and attack you. Something to take note of is when you find treasure, the card itself gets taken out of the deck, whereas if you run across a hazard or a wandering monster, that card is returned to the deck, and that means that the more you look for treasure, the more likely it is you'll find something bad instead of good. When it comes to disarming traps, you have to have a few things. First off, if you're a normal character, like an elf or something like that, you need a toolkit. However, there is a class that doesn't need a toolkit, and that is a dwarf. Either way, when you go to disarm a trap, you first have to tell Zargon that you're gonna give it a shot. After that, you move your character to the square where the trap is, and then you make a roll to see if you succeed. If you roll either a black or white shield with the toolkit, then the trap is disarmed. Congratulations. With a dwarf, your chances are even better. All you have to do is roll a skull or a white shield. If you don't, well, the trap goes off and your character gets hit, so don't do that. If you've come across a trap and you don't have a means to disable it, you can always try jumping over. To jump over a space, you have to have enough movement to move past that space, and you have to roll a combat die and not roll a skull. One exception to this rule is if the trap is in a corner, you cannot jump over it because you can't move diagonally. You have to disarm it or face the consequences of the trap. After finishing all the objectives of the dungeon that you have just delved in, it's time to return to the surface and spend your well-earned wealth. And the way you do that is you go through the market and check out what they have for sale. By that I mean just go through the equipment deck and see what you like, and if you've got enough gold pieces, you can buy up equipment for your next mission. Sometimes you'll want to buy right away, and sometimes you'll just want to hold on to your gold so you can afford something really good. Now obviously I love this game, but let's face it, if you love something, you change it. So for the first house rule, we have earning monster cards, and what that means is basically at the beginning of the game, all the players are supposed to be able to see all of the monsters that they could face. But the Zargon I played under didn't show us the cards. He wanted us to win against the monster, and then he would give us the card as a reward so we know all the stats to know about that monster. It's a little bit more of an incentive to explore the game, and that's how I like to run it myself. Speaking of exploring, this next house rule really speeds things up. If there's no monsters on the board and we've already explored the spaces that we are moving through, then players don't roll for movement, they just move to the next passage or door or whatever. So that's my overview on Hero Quest. It's a really fun game, and there are a few rules that I left out, but half the joy of this game is exploring the game and learning as you go, so why would I spoil it here? Anyway, go check it out, and until next time, this is Hogwash, over and out. I'll catch you later.